Now discussing image-based questions related to the GI tract. Let's get started with the very first one. In this, he has mentioned what is the diagnosis of the patient based on the barium meal study shown below. Now, one, you can rule out Hirschsprung's disease and toxic megacolon right away because what you can see here is definitely the stomach. And obviously, when it comes to evaluating Hirschsprung's or toxic megacolon, we will have to go in for a barium enema. Once option number A and B are ruled out, this is studying the upper GI tract and the curvature of the stomach, the greater and the lesser both can be evaluated. You can see that there is an abrupt cutoff of contrast. Very surprising, but abrupt cutoff of contrast tells you the fact that there is a definitive pylorospasm present or there is a very severe gastric outlet obstruction. Most of the time we get pylorospasm presenting like this in a case of duodenal ulcer. Well, I'm ruling out esophageal varices because D option will usually not be evaluated by a contrast D. For esophageal varices, we can definitely send in a camera and see either a bleeding or a non-bleeding varices as well. The correct answer to this question turns out to be option number C. The highlight of this question is abnormal morphology of the stomach, especially the distal cutoff which is present is very characteristic, especially seen with the duodenal ulcer. At this juncture, I also want to highlight that you might be getting an image in which both the lesser curvature as well as the greater curvature of the stomach might be having an abnormality like is shown in this image. In fact, I've shown a mushroom-like growth, or it's not actually a growth, but I just want to show that there might be two peculiarities which would be present on the lesser and the greater curvature simultaneously. We call this, though it's written on the slide, a niche and a notch sign. This niche and a notch sign is very characteristic of a gastric ulcer. So I have today tried to explain to you the fact that yes, duodenal ulcer, gastric ulcer can be scanned with upper GI endoscopy also. But traditionally, if you follow surgery books or medicine books, they love to give images of barium meal follow-throughs as well. In this particular patient, the image that I showed to you is that of an abrupt cutoff. So you need to get two morphologies right. Abrupt cutoff present of the contrast at the distal end of the stomach. You have to answer duodenal ulcer. On the other hand, in the image that I have hand drawn before you, the contrast can definitely flow forwards, though there might be some amount of pyloric stenosis, but that classical niche and a notch sign that is present on the lesser and the greater curvature respectively would help you identify a gastric ulcer. Let's move on to the next one. This one talks about a 58-year-old male patient with halitosis, bad breath, mild dysphagia, regurgitation of previous day's food items. You are familiar about the fact that regurgitation of previous day's food items is something that you gonna read with two disorders. One is HLHA cardia and second is Zenker diverticulum. The barium study of the patient was performed and he's saying where is the location of this presentation. So step one would be to identify that there is definitely a pulsion diverticulum. This pulsion diverticulum is Zenker diverticulum, and now we need to tell the location of Zenker's diverticulum. Well, esophagus is weakest posteriorly. That is why the moment I read the word anterior segment of the esophagus along the superior pharyngeal constrictor, I'm ruling out option number A of anterior segment and similarly option number C because both are gonna talk about anterior segment, whereas Zenker is usually seen posteriorly, or as I said, esophagus majority of defects are seen posteriorly. It's gonna be posterior segment. Now you need to follow anatomy. I have also hand drawn the diagram in the main discussion with respect to Zenker diverticulum, which is present after the topic of bleeding from the gut in the GI section. If you go through that, I have highlighted that when it comes to Zenker diverticulum, it's gonna be a posterior malformation related to the stomach, would be seen in geriatric population, and it is related to the inferior constrictor muscle. In fact, this particular question, I would like to say that is a fact-based question because you have studied this right from ENT, then even in surgery, and today also being discussed when it comes to internal medicine domain. I highlight the fact that both HLHS cardia and Zenker diverticulum will be having regurgitation of yesterday's food items. So how are you going to differentiate? The differentiation is based on the fact that in HLHS cardia, it's going to be a progressive dysphagia. Whereas in Zenker diverticulum, most of the time it's a non-progressive dysphagia, and the age of presentation is also different because Zenker diverticulum develops at 60-70 years of age and HLHS cardia would be a young female. I hope you recall the fact that the number one cause for HLHS cardia is autoimmunity, and autoimmune disorders are always more common in young females. So I repeat the fact once again. HLHS cardia as well as Zenker both would have similar or can be given as a similar profile, but age of the patient, gender of the patient should definitely give you a bit of a hint, though I'm not saying that age and gender are going to be definitive, but they give you a hint regarding what disease could be present, and then the way he describes the dysphagia symptom is all the way more important. I also want to remind you that the question in the exam said how much percentage of luminal obstruction of the esophagus would be present to cause symptom of dysphagia. That's a huge 66%. So you can imagine that in carcinoma esophagus, which will have a fungating growth, the mass of the tumor will be substantially big to actually contribute to luminal narrowing so that the person can appreciate the dysphagia component. I highlighted this because you see dysphagia usually is not an early feature. It takes time to develop, and by the time it actually comes, because 66% obstruction is really big. So by the time this obstruction would come, it's fairly late and the cancer could definitely even spread as well. I'm now showing you two images, very classical ones. Both of them are having a bird beak appearance, but there's a gross difference. The gross difference, as you can pick up, is you can definitely see that this would be the sigmoid colon. SC stands for sigmoid colon, and then you can see this bird beak appearance in a barium enema. So the diagnosis in this particular case would be given as sigmoid volvulus. Though traditionally in sigmoid volvulus, he can also give you an X-ray abdomen which will be showing a coffee bean appearance, but that may not be appreciated all the time. So contrast study will definitely do the job for you, or you can do a CT abdomen also. On the other hand, the bird beak that I'm showing here is for a barium swallow. That's gonna be a feature that is seen with HLHS cardia, which is a pre-malignant condition. And I've highlighted that the best way for diagnosis of HLHS cardia is a manometry that will reveal an increase in the tone of the lower esophageal sphincter. Primarily why? Because there is going to be loss of inhibitory control. The loss of inhibitory control increases the tone, so therefore food is not going to go down, the food is going to stick behind the chest bone. So people with HLHS cardia is going to say, doctor, I feel as if the food is stuck here, or I'm full up to here, the food is not going down. So I asked him or her, what do you do? They say, then I gulp a whole glass of water. So the combined weight of the water and the food is substantial to overcome the tone of this hypertonic sphincter, and due to gravity, food and water will go down. Therefore, you can definitely appreciate that liquids are lighter and solids are heavier. So solids would still go down by the weight component, but liquids are lighter. So dysphagia will be more as compared to in liquids as compared to solids when it comes to HLHS cardia, though you require a patient with a good intellect to be able to appreciate that. In the next question, we're talking about a child who's having failure to thrive and diarrhea. On examination, there's an anemia with puffy eyes being noted. Intestinal biopsy was being performed. You have to understand that whenever a question begins by describing a child and then goes on to talk about diarrhea, first and the foremost thing, because we are talking about a chronic diarrhea here. How am I saying chronic diarrhea? Because he's talking about failure to thrive, anemia, puffy eyes. We are talking about malabsorption syndrome. And one of the common malabsorption syndrome that is always asked in the exam and is present in pediatric age group is celiac sprue or gluten enteropathy. It is for celiac sprue only that the best test is small intestinal mucosal biopsy. The question says all are true but this condition except option A says crypt abscess. Now crypt abscess is something that we're gonna read with inflammatory bowel disease and definitely not celiac sprue. But let's read on further. Associated with diabetes mellitus type 1, you see children of celiac sprue as they grow older beyond 10 years of age, the severity of celiac sprue might become lesser, and that is when extraintestinal manifestations will come. One of the important extraintestinal manifestations that develops in a case of celiac sprue is diabetes mellitus, so option B looks like a correct statement. C says increase lymphocytes in lamina propria. Now there are reactive changes because if you look at this image, one, you will definitely notice that you cannot identify any villi. The normal finger-like projections, the villi, are definitely not appreciated. This image is definitely showing a villi atrophy. And how do I know it is intestine? Because you can see the appearance of the glands. So villus atrophy is present in this image, and there could be some lymphocytic infiltration because it is an autoimmune disorder. After all, celiac sprue has an antibody. No, the name of that antibody is already given, anti-tissue transglutaminase antibody. But see what has he written in option number D. He has written anti-epidermal tissue transglutaminase antibody. There are two words. One is TTG, tissue transglutaminase. Second is epidermal transglutaminase. So please remember, epidermal, as the name suggests, is going to be related to a skin manifestation. The skin manifestation you're going to see in these patients is dermatitis herpetiformis. So option number B, C, and D is perfectly spot on. The correct answer to this question is option number A, crypt abscess, which is going to be seen with inflammatory bowel disease. Pretty spot on, or a relatively easy question, and you familiar that celiac sprue would be seen with brow, and we can use quinoa or we can use maize for management of this condition. The next one says all of the following statements regarding this image are true except. So one, let us just focus on the image per se, which I'll just zoom in here before you. You will definitely be able to see that this is a contrast study. This is a barium enema. And one of the highlights that is being seen in this patient is these outpouchings, which are present especially towards the sigmoid colon. So the first differential diagnosis of mine in this case would be diverticulosis. Though diverticulosis will be having that very characteristic sawtooth appearance, in this particular image it is not very pronounced. That is what actually happened in the exam, because we are under impression that he'll give you those very characteristic diverticula, but you need to look very carefully. As I'm zooming in, you will definitely be able to see some of the diverticula present. Even on the contralateral side, you can see this is a air barium enema where you can definitely make up the diverticula present, especially with respect to the sigmoid colon on the left hand side, because that's the usual site. Why diverticulosis is common on the sigmoid colon is primarily because it is the narrowest part of the intestine. Option A says defect occurs between tinea coli and blood vessels entering the colonic wall. Looks like a decent statement, so I'll say this is correct. It may be wrong, but at the moment it looks okay, so let's proceed to the next option. They are a result of a tractional force. This also looks okay. This may be correct, this may be wrong. So I am, choosing between A and B. Maybe A is the answer, maybe B is the answer. But let's read on C. He says most common site for this defect is sigmoid colon, as I explained, because that's the narrowest part of the colon. So the stress of chronic constipation contributes to this outpouchings to develop. High fiber diet will definitely reduce the incidence of this defect because this is more common in people who eat lot of meat, like I would say Americans, they eat a lot of beef and hardly any vegetables or roughage or fiber in the diet. So diverticulosis is more common in Western countries. Between option number A and B, now I need to make a informed decision because you see option A, it looks like a decent statement. Let's read that again. Defect occurs between the Taenia coli. You see on the exterior part of the gut, Taenia coli, then the defect is occurring through that and blood vessels entering the colonic wall. Well, what is the significance of this blood vessel entering the colonic wall is obviously the blood supply of the intestines from outside only. What I am trying to highlight is that in diverticulosis, you are aware of a condition by the name of diverticulitis. So the same person of culosis, if we will have diverticulitis, that is when even these blood vessels can be damaged. And that is why in diverticulitis, you always read about a presentation of hematochezia. I want you to understand the fact that bleeding will occur in diverticulitis. Why? Because blood vessels are anatomically present in this area, so the inflammatory part can damage the blood vessels. The correct answer for this except MCQ, you can see except word is again something that I find lots of time under pressure you might actually neglect it. But if you just focus on the words here, the correct answer to this MCQ is option number B, that they are because of a tractional force. Now there's no traction occurring per se, right? It's just chronic constipation contributing to development of this manifestation. Coming to the next question is talking about a 38-year-old patient complaining of rectal bleeding, tenesmus and mucus discharge. Tenesmus means sensation of incomplete evacuation, like he feels that he needs to use the washroom again. On examination, he is having anemia, hypoproteinemia and electrolyte imbalance. That means that the amount of blood loss is pretty substantial and there is even decreased amount of protein. So from this particular description, I am understanding that whatever condition that we are going to diagnose in this patient has to be from the list of those conditions which are having a protein losing enteropathy. In fact, there's a possibility that he's losing so much of blood because he's saying bleeding from the rectum. So he's losing so much of blood that even albumin is being lost. Hypoalbuminemia explains the hypoproteinemia component, and obviously loose stools can contribute to weakness because of the hypokalemia component coming in. On radiological examination, the following image is shown here. You can definitely notice that this would be a barium enema. In this barium enema, however, there is a very characteristic feature that normally you are able to see the hosturations. But in this case, there is a very peculiar presentation in the form of pipe stem colon. Or even if I don't use the classical terminology, I hope you will agree with me that the standard hosturations that should be visible are not present, which makes you think in terms of diagnosis of this condition as ulcerative colitis. The most common site for this is the rectum. Option number A definitely is a correct statement. Sacroiliitis and ankylosing spondylitis. I have explained that the extra-intestinal manifestations of ulcerative colitis, the number one component is arthritis. It's mainly going to be sacroiliitis or a migratory polyarthritis. C says 100% risk of developing of cholangiocarcinoma. You see, people with ulcerative colitis usually tend to develop a colon adenocarcinoma. The incidence of colon cancer is obviously increased in ulcerative colitis. Now, to have a person of ulcerative colitis who's having two cancers, he's having a colonic cancer also as well as a cholangiocarcinoma is a little unlikely. You see, he is trying to test you with the fact that are you aware of the fact that ulcerative colitis is associated with primary sclerosing cholangitis and PSC causes cholangiocarcinoma? Yes, I agree to the fact that ulcerative colitis people can have tendency to develop primary sclerosing cholangitis, which can cause developed cholangiocarcinoma, but that does not happen in all cases, no. So there's something wrong about or fishy about option number C. So we need to be careful because we need to select the correct options. A and B are correct. C is a little plus minus. So now let me read D. Campylobacter infection can mimic the early phase of this condition. Please appreciate the fact that Campylobacter per se can contribute to presentation similar to that of dysentery, and it might persist for a relatively few days to weeks. So if it's not treated, so yes, I mean inflammatory bowel disease, even Campylobacter infection can mimic early phase of disease. Looks like an okay statement. The correct statements here are option number A, B and a D. In fact, he has done very smart thing that if you have not read the fact that Campylobacter, because the presentation of Campylobacter is blood in the stool, no? So that's why I'm saying that option number D is a correct statement, because otherwise they can be errors of judgment as well. But option number C, I'll put it like this: a person having two diagnoses or two different cancers in a single patient is highly unlikely. In the next question, he is talking about a very peculiar complaint of dysphagia to non-vegetarian food items. I mean, we study about dysphagia for liquids more than solids, solids more than liquids, but mainly to non-veg food, and then the barium swallow findings are given in this case. A says apple core appearance. Well, traditionally, apple core appearance is what you read with the carcinoma of the colon. So I definitely can rule out option number A, spot on. B says Schatzki's ring. Well, it's a malformation in the esophagus in the lower part, and in this particular case, you can definitely see some indentation. This indentation is in the lower part, and therefore it is limiting the contrast which is flowing into the stomach. So yeah, Schatzki's ring can be a possibility. Let's read C. Bird beak appearance is seen with achalasia cardia. Definitely not a bird beak, so ruled out. So you have to select between option number B and D, Schatzki's and esophageal web. Please appreciate the fact that esophageal web is more common in the upper esophagus. I have highlighted and talked about Plummer-Vinson syndrome, where we have a upper esophageal web or upper esophageal involvement, and if you look at the image provided, you will notice that the indentation which is present in this image is very close to the fundus of the stomach. The correct answer to this question is option number beta. People with Schatzki's ring, they can even develop a meat impaction. If you go through the diseases of the esophagus, I have highlighted this fact that these people can even end up with aphasia, and there's even a distinct possibility of perforation of the esophagus. I'm not going to call that Boerhaave syndrome, because Boerhaave is related to vomiting or instrumentation. There's a definitive possibility of the meat getting stuck and then a perforation of the esophagus occurring, causing chemical mediastinitis in this condition as well. So most of the time we advise these patients to either avoid eating non-veg, or they can obviously, cook it properly, make a puree out of it, or maybe in a mixie. I mean, they make it in a fashion that it can pass down this narrowing in the lower part of the esophagus. The correct answer to this question is option number beta. The next one talks about an intestinal biopsy specimen of a patient before and after the dietary restriction. Now, the moment you read that, because you're doing biopsy of the same patient 2 times, and then he's talking about a child also, so the spot on clinical information he's giving you is that he wants to talk about celiac sprue. It's an except question. The most common complication of celiac sprue is development of cancer. Yes, that's a correct statement. I have explained to you that these people can develop lymphoma of the GI tract. Do not answer the number 1 cause of death in celiac sprue as infection, malnutrition, hypokalemia, electrolyte imbalances. It is actually cancer of the gut which is the number 1 reason for mortality, and this can usually develop in the 2nd decade of life of these people. The most sensitive test for these patients is anti-TTG, tissue transglutaminase antibody. I have explained to you the fact that epidermal transglutaminase antibodies, what you read with celiac proves association, that is dermatitis herpetiformis, which was one of the questions earlier. It is ETG and TTG. Epidermal transglutaminase is related to dermatitis herpetiformis. However, B is the correct statement. Classic changes in celiac sprue occur in the submucosa. Looks like an okay statement. Let's read D. Associated with dermatitis herpetiformis. So I'm wondering to myself, I mean, all the four options are correct, but it's an exact question. Please appreciate that there is a error in option number C. If I read option number C casually, I'm likely to skip it, because in celiac sprue the problem is not in the submucosa, it is in the mucosa. No, you can see these three alphabets. The word sub, S-U-B, it's not a submucosal disease. No, it's a mucosal disease. These three alphabets can definitely make or break a career, so careful reading is important, and that is why I would suggest you to always sit with a laptop on when you're doing the Q bank, and rather sit on a chair and a table and try to do these questions with utmost confidence. Like imagine you are in an exam scenario, because the more you replicate the exam scenario on a regular basis, that is when the palpitations in the exam will be minimal and your ability to focus will be there. I have seen most people, they think they will be able to do it, but after half an hour, 1 hour, they tend to get tired sitting in front of a laptop. Then mobile phone will come out, you'll check out your status, etc., etc. So I would suggest you to practice what I've already highlighted so many times: internet darkness. When you're studying, there should be no internet which is gonna relate to social media. Right, obviously you would need internet to listen to my data, or you can download the data to your device and listen to that. That's another option which a lot of brilliant people have done. In fact, when I talked to a couple of people of the recently concluded November INICT paper, a lot of chaps, they were off social media for 6 months, 8 months, 1 year. I mean, they deleted their accounts altogether. You can listen to the videos on the YouTube channel of RepLadder, and even on my social media profile, sometimes these videos are there. I mean, look at the dedication. No social media, no social accounts, and some people even changed their phones. And they changed their phone to that simple, 2,000, 3,000 rupees wala phone, which very poor people will be using, because just phone hi to sunna hai, right? So, I mean, that's just advice from